May 3rd edition of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board meeting. Call it to order. Let's do roll call. Wendy.
And I'm going to shake things up and start with Heather King.
Oh, Wendy, I'm here.
Bob Salinger. Ed Washington. Eric Molander. Tammy Stephenson.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid.
Here.
James Allison. See you, James. Don't hear you. Yeah.
Here. Is that better?
Corky Collier.
Here.
Emerald Vogue. Lori Stegman.
Here.
Ashton Simpson.
Here.
Seth Reeser.
I just got a message from Seth that he is having trouble getting in, and if you can send him the Zoom link.
Yeah. Emily, are you able to do that really quick for me?
Yep, I got it.
Thank you. Dave Rittman. Eric Mueller.
Here.
Steve Fancher.
Here.
Nancy Hendrickson.
Here, and for once I was ready to be the first person, so glad you're shaking it up.
We have 10 members present. Oh, and here comes Eric Mullen.
Okay. Eric, can you hear us? Eric is here. Jessica is joining as well. Oh, Wendy, you're on mute.
And Emerald Vogue is joining as well. 12 members are present.
Excellent. Well, before we get started and go into exec session, which is the kind of first order of business we have today, I want to say a few things as in my role as board chair. We've been into and are diving deeper into work that has real financial implications to residents and businesses that all of you guys represent to some degree. And the work is hugely important to the region. So this is naturally going to come with heightened sense of urgency, heightened emotions, and we're expressing often in a position to have to express our opinion about these things in this public setting, kind of in front of everybody. This is naturally going to come, it's going to cause a heightened sense of urgency and heightened emotions in us. And when we're expressing our opinions and seeking answers to our questions, it's easy for this heightened level of emotion to come across to other board members and staff as hostility or disrespect, especially in this virtual setting. I urge everyone to try to be aware of where you're at emotionally and to take extra care to avoid unintentional personalization of frustration towards others. I'm not saying you shouldn't express your opinions or have disagreements. That's your role here. But remember that we're in a public meeting space, with many other individuals that we all hold in high regard. If there are certain things that can be taken offline to address, I urge you to consider that path. Also, staff's working incredibly hard to get all 17 of us the information we need to make the decisions we need to make. In some cases, it just becomes too much when we only have a certain number of days between meetings and a certain number of staff to collect and get these answers put together. I'm not asking for you not to ask those questions. Again, that's your role here. But please have some grace when it comes to the time and the resource limitations we're dealing with. Jim has the challenge of trying to keep all of us happy while managing the workload of his staff and trying to allow them to have a healthy work-life balance. And that's not happening very well right now as far as the healthy work-life balance goes. I want you guys to be aware of that. I don't want to take up too much more time with this board meeting, but I also want to open it up for a few ideas, any suggestions that you guys have about how we can keep our decorum healthy. Undoubtedly, we're going to be going through what's even more contentious, more difficult work. We are looking at some training opportunities around microaggressions and healthy board dynamics, but what other ideas do you have just to make sure that we as a large 17-member board can stay together and move this work forward in a healthy way? James.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that introduction. I guess one thing or two things I would remind myself, one is, maybe three. One is to assume positive intent when someone is speaking and presenting, to assume that they are presenting something with the greatest effort for us to understand and move our goals forward. Second is, I'm reminded how Mike Jordan used to talk about this effort as one of the most functional and collaborative things he had done over the course of his career. Having been involved for 6 or 7 years now, I'm amazed at what we have accomplished based on the long tenure of staff, the deep knowledge of staff, the high commitment and engagement of board members. And we need to continue that. There was a third, but it must not have been that profound. So anyway, that's what I would offer.
Thanks, James. If it was as profound as the first two, it was definitely there. So thank you. Seth, is that you? City of Wood Village?
That's me. Just as a comment that will hopefully help lessen the frustration that comes up in the meetings. I got some feedback from my city manager. We had a meeting with the district on the to review some of the proposed changes for the operating revenue and expenditures. And after the meeting, he came in and asked if that was how our board meetings were. And I asked him what he meant. And he said, well, there was an hour meeting. We had 58 minutes of presentation. There wasn't really any time for comments or feedback. And I hadn't had a chance to review that before the meeting, so I couldn't really give any constructive feedback. And so I think maybe having more time on the agenda dedicated to allowing the board to deliberate in open meetings and more lead time would help alleviate some of the frustration. And I know that staff is working hard to try and do that, but that was some feedback that I received from my boss on that.
Thanks, Seth. Heather?
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I think what I want to say is there's something that I use when I facilitate workshops and workshops I've been to, and it's called step up, step back, and it's used in multiple ways. But I think in line with what you're speaking to, it could be used as a moment for people to sort of step back, be aware of their emotions, their feelings, and their thoughts before they speak. And also just be aware of the answers that have been given to you. One of the things that I've witnessed in meetings is someone will answer a question and then the question gets asked again, and then it gets answered by someone that has someone with more authority, and the answer is accepted fully and completely. And so just be aware and listen. But I think for me, it's more just step up when you have the ability and space, step back when you need to take a break and a deep breath before you are addressing someone from the staff, because they are working hard. And it's very apparent in what they present to us at every single board meeting. And I know I appreciate the work that's coming forth and being presented.
Thanks, Heather. We'll take one last comment from Mary Helen, and then we'll jump into our executive session. Mary Helen?
Trying to I'm sorry, I was having trouble with the mute button. I know that I'm one that asks a lot of questions, and that's why a friend gave me a t-shirt that says Ask a Lotus. I didn't wear it today because I'd been wearing it for about 5 days because of other meetings where they say I ask too many questions. I don't know how to get the answers. I have never felt that staff's not working hard. I admit that there are times when I get a 100-page packet and then I can't find the answer, so I ask, and they've always been very kind and accommodating and say you can find it on page 18 or you can find it on this page. Jim sent me an email at 7 a.m. this morning to a bunch of questions that I asked. I have a different constituency than a lot of people who respond to government officials. I have people on the street and I have people that are concerned about the cost. And so I come at it from a little bit of a different angle. I don't have a pot of money, but I have a pot of people. And that's who I have to get questions asked for. If I ever came across as not appreciating the staff, I deeply apologize because I've never felt that ever before. I started the first day with Love You Ready Columbia sitting next to Mike Jordan, and he's probably about the wisest man I know in the city of Portland as far as being a facilitator and a peacemaker. And he would often, probably now shouldn't tell the story, but he would tap me on my leg, and that was a sign to be quiet, just wait and listen. And so that was my tap on the leg moment for all of you, because I don't know how else to get the questions answered. And so if there's another way that's easier than sending them an email, which was requested, or verbally having a conversation, I'm more than willing. But everyone's heard me say I'm not an accountant, so a lot of those things go over my head. And Eric Molander is now the chair of Penn 2, and he will attest to the fact that I'll say, what does that mean? Because he knows the business. So thank you for letting me do my mea culpa. And if I ever get out of line or say something bad, tap me on the leg and say, be quiet, and we'll get to you later.
Thank you, Mary Helen. One thing I think of is, I know I'm not an expert in all of the technical areas that we have to deal with, but we have 17 board members. So we have lots of folks that we can lean on for review expertise in some areas. And some areas I just have to trust that that person is doing that, or that in some cases that, we have the right staff expertise in place. But I don't at any time think that my role as board member, I have to review every kind of element to the nth degree. And maybe that's a balance we can try to strike as a board. I know we've spent enough time on this. We don't have a lot of time to get through the meat of what we need to get through today. So let's jump into our executive session. I'm going to read the script to get us there.
And I'll just say, I'm sorry, Steve, just to jump in, we do have some guests here with us today for the executive session, and staff has identified everyone and feels comfortable with them being here, but please reach out to Steve if you have any questions or concerns.
So Wendy, as a point of just protocol, do we need to jump into breakout rooms for the purpose of the executive session?
I was going to keep us in this room, so that's why I said that. So we have some staff here from Metro and County, and some MCV staff, and legal advisor Hong. Is there anyone you want to introduce?
Mr. Chair, my observation in both pre-meeting and then looking through the list of that the people in attendance are pretty critical to supporting board members or staff, and having them be able to participate or listen in to this conversation will be valuable to the board's efforts.
Okay. So then,
and Hong, if you have any concerns, please speak up. I don't mean to jump in front of your portion of this meeting.
Yeah, no, we expect that the joint and common interest privilege extends to these individual staff, assuming that they are here representing an entity on which there is a board position posted.
Okay. With that, The Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board will now meet in executive session under ORS 40.225, ORS 192.3559A, and 192.6602F, which allow the board to meet in executive session to receive legal advice and attorney-client communication. Designated staff and consultants, as well as representatives of the news media, which I don't believe we have, in attendance shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Board members are specifically directed, I guess that's everyone in attendance, specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to the public session. We estimate this will be around 2 o'clock or a little bit thereafter. And back into our regular board meeting. I apologize to some folks that I think were joining us from the outside to the regular meeting. We were anticipating 2 o'clock. It went a little bit long, but here we are back. And our first order of business, let me pull my agenda up. We're not gonna, so Lori suggested not jumping into the revised operating forecast. I'll offer my own opinion here, and I agree with her because I think I'm sensing a lot of board frustration when certain folks have had maybe a chance to dive into details on something because they had a few days to do that, and certain folks weren't. So we get a level of dialogue going, and we have some folks that haven't even seen the information yet. So I would suggest we table that to a later meeting, which would put us into the discussion around the GEO bond. Is that where we're at on the agenda? I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull mine up. Yes, okay. So I'm going to turn it over at this point, unless I get any objections, to Carrie.
Yeah,
Carrie,
well,
are you ready to go?
welcome,
You
I
and
gotta,
Jamie?
yeah, we are. I mean, I thought our discussion wasn't gonna happen, so it's like a real switcheroo here, but we're definitely ready and excited to talk with you and give you some space to think about the GEO bond scenarios. And, you know, as we're mentioning with the operating revenue, wanting to have that opportunity to process, to discuss with each other, to hear back from each other what you're thinking in advance of the public engagement period, which is starting right around your next meeting. We'll be having a lot of outreach events and bringing in public input to also supplement the continued deliberation and discussion over the summer. So I'll hand it over to Jamie to get us into today's discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carrie. And Sheriff Fancher, just one clarification about timing. So originally this agenda item was going to happen at 3 and go until about 3:05, and we added extra time to this board meeting to be able to have it. And here we are at 2:30. So I'm not suggesting that we add have our item take an hour, but should we plan to be done close to 3, or what do you suggest?
I suggest you take the time you need to get, the best information conveyed to us, because we do have longer than that. So
right.
Take what you need.
All right, great. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. We've got just a simple PowerPoint to share with all of you, and kind of a fun activity that we would like you to participate in. Where is my present? There it is. Okay, so some of these slides will look familiar to you, and then we've got a couple of new ones. This one, of course, looks familiar to you. We start nearly every GeoBond conversation with this slide, but you'll see a red box around the green bars. And Carrie did a nice job of doing a call out here to just have us focus in. on these green bars, just to kind of clarify where we are in our conversation and what's coming up. So here we are in May, May 3rd, and we've been giving you a heads up for the last month or two that we're really hoping to go out and begin our public conversation about the GeoBonds towards the end of May. And so that's where you'll see the begin public outreach. But let me just walk through some of the other timeline items here. So, the public outreach, we're hoping to begin it towards the end of May. We've already done some limited public outreach around just some general education about flood safe Columbia River. And we really are going out in earnest in June, in May, June, July, to bring back to you in August some information about what we've heard from the community. And then you will have beginning your polling options. This is where you will decide as a board, what are the scenarios that you need to poll and get some more input on, so that you know what you want to refer. And then that will happen through August, October. You'll get your results back. And then in December is when you, again, as a board, have a responsibility to take that information in and decide what you're going to refer to the voters. And this is all assuming a May 2024 election, which we're still working towards. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that and just kind of hone in on that schedule. So this just goes back to that one. And again, this is a slide you've seen before from NOAA. We're in the middle of our bond scenario conversations. We've talked with you about that the bond scenarios are a starting point for the GeoBond discussions. It's a starting point for you and for the community. It's a way to start to package what the needs are and what the dollar figures are around those. The public input from community education and outreach and engagement will inform the board to help refine these options. That's exactly, that's what I was talking about before. So you can have some more input from the public and increase your comfort level that you're on the right path and that the public is there with you. We'll provide engagement updates and technical issues at every board meeting moving forward. I think you've seen us at nearly every board meeting for since January, talking about this in some form or another. And then as the schedule on the previous slide said, you'll have an option to refer this in later this year. So just a little recap of our conversations to date around the GeoBond. So on March 16th, we introduced the draft scenario concepts and how they were developed. You all had a lot of questions for us prior to that about methodologies and inputs and how these things come to be. And what we heard from all of you is that you wanted more detail about finding the numbers and project details, what projects are included in each of these scenarios. So on April 20th, we delivered to you a detailed handout with the draft scenarios that was part of your packet. And we had some, sort of testing the waters conversation with all of you about, what do you think and what questions do you have and how prepared do you think you are to have us start going out and talking to the public? And what we heard from all of you was we needed more time and space to digest and discuss this. It's a lot of information. You want to take your time. And so some of the questions that you asked us are, how do we plan? What's our plan if the Portland Metro Levee System, the Corps of Engineers projects, if those costs go up? And then you wanted more information on the projects at the $250 million level. And then also, what are the savings that we can get from doing projects now as opposed to delay and defer when we know dollars are more expensive? So that's some of what we heard. So today, what we propose is that, you have your handout for reference. This is the same one that was in your packet. We actually sent it out as a separate item in preparation for this meeting so that it wasn't buried in a packet. So it was easier for you to pull out. So you've got your handout. What we propose is that we spend about 15 minutes in small group conversations. And we've sort of pre-populated your groups based on just, a good mix of people so that, we don't have all agency folks in one, and neighborhood folks or business folks in another. So we've kind of tried to spread you around. We have 4 groups of 4, and in every one of the groups, there'll be a staff member there from the steering team who'll be in a listening mode. And each one of the groups will have a facilitator, myself or Carrie or Colin or Emily will be facilitating. And so we want to do this for a couple of reasons. One is we want to get you all talking more with each other, and so it's nice to be able to do that in a small group. The other is it just gives you more opportunities to share your thoughts, and we'll be taking some notes, and then we'll come back and do a 10-minute report out of the things that we've heard, so that everybody gets the benefit of what folks have heard in each of the groups. And then we'll talk about next steps. For our public that are viewing today, we'll have one small group that'll stay in the main room so that you can have a benefit of the conversation that's happening there. And then we have set up a special meeting on May 11th. We're calling office hours, and so we can have a whole, I believe it's an hour. Is that right, Carrie? On May 11th? Yeah. So we'd have an hour set aside for some office hours focused just on this topic. We'll have a hybrid option. You can come in person, you can come on online, and we can, again, spend more time. And then we also have time on the May 18th agenda to continue this conversation. So we want you to know that we've got a couple more points where we're going to be talking about this to make sure that we're answering your questions and hopefully raising your comfort level around these different scenarios. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, there is a third-party review of cost estimates that are underway. Dave, I see your hand up. I'm going to go ahead and grab you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a general question for everybody. How has anyone thought of how can we go forward with the GEO bond when the district itself is undefined or is subject to all these legislative changes? I just worry that trying to sell the bond, hey, we need this for the area, but we haven't decided how the district's going to be run.
You mean because of the connection with the operating revenue piece and the outstanding questions around that?
Exactly.
Jim, I see that you've come off mute. You want to help me with this?
I can try. I think there are some real implications, Councillor, and thanks for raising them. But I also recognize that the bond is going to be repaid by the property value of the district itself, regardless of the operating revenues. So the bondholders could be assured that they're going to get repaid. And the other reason to keep moving is we do believe we have a reasonably clear path forward. We obviously have more conversation to have with you and others about operating revenue. But we also know that that local match generates almost $100 million in federal funding. And so keeping that moving feels important to us. We believe that the other issues are resolvable with more discussion. So the two things are not directly linked. There are political implications that you are right to point out.
Well, I wasn't worried about the bondholders so much as getting this to, it's the voters. Selling it to the voters. We got to sell it to the voters. And
Yeah.
I'm worried that it's a little undefined as to what they're buying into, but okay, if you think that's not a problem.
Well, I think it's manageable. And I think the important indication, and we could get our consultants on, the political consultants, but I suspect that most people are unaware and will remain unaware of the machinations of the internal funding of the district. But again, I think you're right to point that out. There are some smart stakeholders who will elevate this, and it's why it's a priority for us to keep talking about it and get it resolved.
Jamie or somebody, do you mind sharing the handout in the chat or someplace that's easy reference for folks if we're referencing it in the breakout sessions?
Yeah, Wendy or Carrie, can you put that in the chat for folks?
I'm going to open the rooms. So you should see an invitation to join a room. And if you do not, then we're asking you to stay in this main room.
Yeah, great. And Wendy,
I'm going to stop your sharing now.
And Wendy, are you able to put in the chat in all the rooms the handout so people can access it?
Yeah, I will do that.
Great. And so just timing wise, it's what is it, 2:47? So we're going to stay in our small groups until just a little after 3, and then we'll do a 10-minute report out. And then we'll have just a quick kind of next steps, what's happening next, to remind you of the next couple of opportunities. Carrie, is there anything I forgot?
No, I don't think so. Did you get the discussion questions? I don't know that you got to the slide with the discussion questions, but
That's right.
certainly the facilitators will have that and be able to share it in the chat and verbally in the room.
Right, exactly. And just for everybody's benefit, there are 2 discussion questions. They're the exact same questions we asked you last time when we, just to get a sense of where you are. The first is, let's see, what questions do you have to understand the scenarios better? And the second question is, what additional information would be helpful for you when discussing the scenarios with your community? Those are the two questions that we'll be asking you to talk with each other about in the small groups.
I
Okay.
think a lot of folks have gone, so.
All right.
Them in the room.
Let's go.
Jamie, we have Nancy Henderson, Eric Molander, Jamie Stephenson. And also present is a guest who may be joining the board representing Diversified Marine, new business representative. So it's here observing.
Great. Thanks, Wendy Lynn. Appreciate that. And then again, for our public who are observing, the rest of the board has gone into breakouts. We will do a report out so everybody gets to hear what everyone had to say. But we're broadcasting this one so that you get a sense of what the conversation is. So Tanny, Eric, Nancy, and
So just to be clear, so who's facilitating this one? Is it you, Jamie?
that's me.
Great. And you're also taking notes, so thanks for that.
Yep. And so again, it's just it's very informal. We want you to just go, we can go around the horn. You can, somebody can just jump in. It's really, you know, have you had some time to look at the packet? What questions do you have that to better understand the scenarios better? And what additional information will be helpful when discussing this with your community? So whoever wants to start.
So I'll just start with the bonehead question, which is I'm looking at my packet, and in my packet is a bunch of scenarios. There's the executive summary, and then there's a nice table, and I see all these things, and I can't find it right now, but what is the piece about addressing our additional mandates with respect to flood safety, like the environmental stuff, the green infrastructure, the equity, environmental justice, and sense of place or cultural sense of place? Where is that? Can you help me find that?
So what you'll see is that and we've been working closely with Lori and Jim and the steering team about how to address the additional mandates. And what you'll see is that by and large, they're integrated as a part of projects because that's what's required moving forward. And so they're not necessarily call outs, but in the increased investments going from scenario 1 to 2 to 3, there's greater level of investment as there are more projects. And so we did say that all the steering team members are here to listen, but Jim, I do see that you're here with us. And because this one is being recorded and televised, I want to make sure I haven't spoken out of turn. So Jim, is there anything you want to clarify that? I think Jim is still here. Well, that is my understanding.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I have the handout. Do you know where that can be found?
Brent, they put it in the chat.
So
I don't think it made it into.
I sent out 2 separate documents. So one is the summary of the bond, and that's separate than the packet. So the packet included the revised revenue forecast, which we postponed today, and we're not talking about that. So Nancy, there should have been a separate document, which was just the bonds detail.
Yeah, so I think it was someone else who asked about that.
My
Right.
apologies for stepping away. I went to the restroom.
I
To
thought,
Wendy.
Nancy, you were saying that you were trying to find that piece. So sorry if I misunderstood.
No,
Yeah.
I think someone else is trying to find it.
Yeah, Brent's looking for it. He's in this our session and he wants to know where to find it. And so can you put the handout in the chat, Wendy Lynn?
No, I can't right now. I did email that out to all the board members in advance.
Did Brent get it?
And Brent did get it, but he wasn't expecting to have to respond today. So I'll send it out again.
Thank you.
Okay, and Jim, so the question that we asked you while you were away at the restroom, Nancy was wondering, she had a question about where do we find the how the additional mandates for the new district are being addressed in the bond scenarios in the handout. And the answer that I gave was that it is integrated as a part of the projects, and there's greater levels of investment as you move from scenario 1 to 2 to 3. And that is the counsel that we've received from Lori and others, that they need to be tied to the projects and tied to flood safety. So I had asked your clarification to make sure that I didn't misspeak.
Yeah, that is correct. And then you'll see, again, in the next version of the very drafty operating forecast, we did put it in a placeholder of $500,000, given that the board, we've heard from the board both less and more. So we kind of put a placeholder in there for additional dialogue with the board about how they might want to advance those mandates. There's also dollars in the operating revenue forecast for the development of a watershed plan. Again, more discussion required by the board about the level of funding contemplated in the next version of the draft forecast.
Mm-hmm. And just a reminder that as a result of the watershed plan, then you have more definition around projects, and then you can release potentially, more of the dollars that the voters have approved if they so approve them.
And Bill and Carrie are in a stronger position to describe how some of the existing projects have some of those mandates integrated in them. They've been doing that work and putting the numbers to that and incorporating that into the initial cost estimates. So we could come back for more conversation.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I could summarize that into answering some of these questions. Like, what questions do you have to understand the scenarios better? Maybe I think, in the city of Portland, who I am representing on this team, is definitely has a general taxing authority, right? And so we do a lot of things. We definitely have a sensitivity to many things: business districts, affordability, and also environmental impacts and things like that. So I guess let's see, what questions do I have to understand the scenarios better? I think specifically how the additional mandates will be folded in. I see on page 17, actually, there's some specifics there, and which I appreciate. And then also the yeah, so beyond that, maybe and I see there's some specific projects here too. I guess what would maybe put a finer point on that and say, these are examples. Like, as we get the watershed plan, for instance, moved forward, we may get, some of these examples may fall off and some other ones may come on. Like, they're example representative, right?
Okay, so I noted that.
Yeah, so that's discussing the scenarios with the community. I would say definitely hitting those four things very well, because the community that we deal with, like internally at the city to support our larger City of Portland communities, there's a lot of agendas, and I think they somewhat understand the utility and the flood safety agenda a little bit more than the rest of these, so they'll have more questions around those because we get asked them.
Okay. Great, thanks. Annie, Eric? Others?
Couple of questions. Obviously, there's going to be some staff built into the bond projects, and I'm guessing that most of those are going to come out of existing staff. They're going to transfer over to the bond projects. And if so, how's that time going to be calculated? How's that going to be done? We're looking at an administrative position. I guess I'm just like, we're doing that before the bond passes.
I think it's a deputy project manager position
Okay.
to start taking on some of the pre-design work with the Corps and managing the setup of the construction process. That's the initial position.
Okay.
And we have approximately 3 FTE that we're using in the forecast that could be funded by bond. We think that one of those, again, it's a recommendation from staff at this point, requires board discussion and approval, but we're recommending a compliance person and an accounting specialist to track the bond funds, staff the bond oversight committee, ensure that we're measuring and tracking staff time according to bond council direction and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. We've got a deputy project manager. It's also contemplated to be funded by the bond. And I'm totally blanking on the next one. I think that is intended to be support for the rest of the staff who may be doing partial time on the bond. Then there are additional staff, Tanny, primarily in the construction management and engineering phase that are costed into the initial draft bond price calculations. I don't know what that amounts to in a specific FTE, but Bill could probably describe that for you. And I regret not having that information for you now.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, we're capturing these questions, so that's something we can follow up on, Tanny.
And just to stress, in the forecast, we've estimated based on using the lowest level of bond funding that staff is recommending at 150 million. And if you take 5% of that, we've started with a 5% cap on administrative charges to the bond. That generates over the 10-year period approximately $205,000 a year.
And I think the board will have an opportunity to talk about the forecast specifically. So that's the item we postponed. So
yeah, just trying to give him the sense of where the staffing is in the bond as we're contemplating it currently.
I didn't catch what Wendy just said. Sorry.
Oh, I think we'll still have an opportunity at the next meeting to talk about the forecast specifically in more depth as well, in addition to the bond discussion.
Okay.
Tanny, what else do you have for us?
Go ahead, Eric. I'll catch back up.
Okay. Hey, Eric.
So the fundamental question is, as we look at a number of projects that we've had that have exploded in cost between our initial estimate and then once we got to the 30% design, one of the questions that people will have is, so what gets dropped off when PMLS goes up significantly? And I'd like to be able to answer that question for them.
Yeah, so how do we prioritize the projects if there are cost increases?
Highlighting another conversation for the board to have, and that's why we're getting some independent cost estimates. That notion of contingency is obviously a big topic and what's acceptable and appropriate under different projects. So good question, good issue, Eric. Thank you.
And Eric, I think Mark Wilcox his ears must have been burning because he just joined our group right when you asked that question. What other questions do you have, Eric?
I'm going to pass it over to the other board members.
Okay.
So just to be mindful of not speaking before everyone has spoken, I know Tanny and I and Eric have all spoken. Are there other board members who would like to? Where are you, James?
Yeah, I was wondering about James.
Might be driving.
I think maybe he's on his phone, so maybe wasn't able to join the group. I just noticed him.
Oh, interesting.
James, are you with us?
I am, but I'm driving right now, so I'm kind of trying to just listen.
Thank you.
All right, well, we just have a few more minutes. So what other?
I guess one question would be if we don't go for like all these projects are needed eventually, there's a timing issue, right? And I think I asked it last time, so I'll just ask it a different way this time, which is if we go for a lower funding one, I think that just means that we come back later for another bond to catch up with the other projects. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think that is a fair assumption. It's one scenario moving forward. One of the things that Bill has talked with us about is when you look at the higher numbers, it includes pumps, pump replacements and projects that will have aged out, within the time frame of the bond that we're working within, and so they would need to be replaced. They're ones that are known that need to be replaced at some point here in the near future anyway. And so do we do them now? Do we do them later? That's one of the trade-off questions for all of you. But Nancy, to answer your question, in addition, that is a consideration for the board about whether or not to go out for another bond for projects that didn't make it into this first one if you go to a lower level. Penny, I see it came off mute.
Yeah, Nancy, did you all done there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just assuming that if we went for the junior package, the value menu thing, we'd be looking at like coming back in 10 years, right, with another one to do the rest of the projects.
It's possible. Yeah, that is one of the things that Bill has said. Or, I mean, you need to be exploring revenue options.
Okay.
And the geo bond is one of them. Grants are another. Raising your revenue, operating revenues is, I mean, there's a lot of ways, but yeah.
And just my only other concern would be making sure that when we go out with messaging that a landowner isn't thinking this is going to be the only new assessment that they're going to have.
Right. And they would probably be sequential, right? Like if you have a geo bond for 5 years and you're like, well, we need another one, then it would be either years 6 to 10 or years 11 to 15. We have that a lot with something on my ballot today, actually.
Annie, are you thinking about whatever fee or privilege tax or increase in assessments if it's a floodplain owner, or were you thinking about a second ballot measure, geo bond, or what was I wanted to make sure I understood.
I'm just thinking as a package, right? Mm-hmm. I just wouldn't want somebody to see the bond and think, okay, this is all I'm going to pay in the future. So yippee skippy, my rates are going down.
Got it.
When if we have A, B, and C and add them all together, what does that look like?
And Tanny, that's a real risk, from a political perspective as well. That, I mean, that's one of the considerations for all of you when you're thinking about what's the right size to go out to the public for now, is that, it's a very complicated set of messages that we're bringing out. And people could be left with the sense of, oh, great, if we got it all taken care of. Like you said, if you're going with the junior one or the value meal approach, and then to have to come back and say, well, actually, there's these other ones, and there may be smaller projects or lower tier projects or less sexy projects. Not that all the other ones are more sexy, and it becomes more challenging, for the public to support them. I noticed I think our other groups have joined us. Is that what?
I think we still have one out. Shall I bring them back?
Yeah, go ahead and bring them back. But Eric, I didn't know if you had some other things, because I feel like you just shared one.
Right, and so one of the things is that in our forecast, we have $1.5 million for what's called operating capital. These are things that wear and tear and break over time that have an asset life of 5 or 7 years. And so what we would want to do is make certain that the public understands that no, the GEO bond is really directed at these major upgrades to the system, that as part of the bill that they get every year, we replace assets on an ongoing basis when they wear out. So in years 11 through 20, we still have probably about $15 to $20 million worth of operating, capital that will be that has a limited lifespan. And we still have another $25 or $30 million worth of major upgrades that have a 20, 30, 40-year lifespan. So just being clear with them about how each of these things are being funded is going to be important.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that. So I think everybody's joined us, has rejoined us. So I want to make sure that we spend a little time doing a report out. And I've taken some notes, and certainly group members make sure that I've accurately captured them. And we're not expecting to do an exhaustive report out. It's just everybody's going to take like a minute or two to share some of the things they've heard. So we were group 1, and we had Nancy and Tanny, and
just wait a second, Jamie. The folks are still rejoining.
okay, oh, actually, we weren't group 1.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah.
Are we all back?
I think so.
Go ahead and take it away, Jamie.
Great, thank you. I think everybody's back. Well, thank you. First, I want to say thanks for participating in the small groups. I know we don't do that very often, but it does give everybody a chance to participate in a way that's efficient, So we'll go ahead and share what we heard. So the group that stayed in the main room we heard from Nancy and Tanny and Eric, and we didn't hear from James. He was on his phone, but he was listening. And so some of the questions that this group brought up were, to be very clear with the public about how additional mandates are being addressed, and how do we find them, in the scenario. How do we talk about that and give examples? There was a question about how will staff time be calculated when it moves over to the projects, recognizing that there's staff that will be associated with projects, and so what's that calculation look like? We talked about following up with Bill on that. There was a question about, if we go with whatever package we go with, if costs increase on the PMLS project, for example, what gets dropped? What don't we do? How do we prioritize? There was a comment about being clear with the community that there may be additional assessments in the future if the board does decide to go with a lesser, one of the lower level bonds, and being clear about how ongoing maintenance, wear and tear, already scheduled smaller level replacements, how those are being funded as opposed to the large investments in the system that the GEO bond is funding. So I'll pause there and group. Did I miss anything? Not seeing anything more from them. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Colin then.
All right, I'll go through and then have anyone jump in. So Steve and Mary Helen were in the group, and Lori was also with us. So yeah, what questions do we have to understand the scenario better? I think that, there was a pretty good understanding on overall what's in there. There's a few pieces that I think Steve was going to follow up with Bill just for clarity, but overall wanted to really make sure that we did all the minimum projects, and then to really get a good understanding of what needs to be done in the next 10 years and focus on those. A good understanding around that some ideas around that you only have one shot to sort of get this right, account for inflation, things like that. However, we also need to keep the costs in check. And then one thing that was identified as really being needed, and this was, it's not exactly what questions, but what's missing was not having 1 or 2 sentences. That was a really strong selling point for the bond package. And we actually workshopped a little bit of it and kind of got a couple pieces, around flood insurance and, federal funding, federal regulations, things like that, before we moved on. Talked a little bit more about how, who the right messengers were. Some of that matched up with what we had heard from our focus groups. Some of the technical pieces being able to be described technically, but accurately and understandably. And then that insurance piece came up as I guess some neighbors in Penn 2 had done their own sort of insurance work about what premium changes could look like. So, if we could have some of the messengers be insurance professionals to sort of describe what loss of accreditation might look like. Other thing is bringing in the community-based organizations, and we talked about some of the engagement strategy that we have in place and how that could be leveraged. And then one piece that was more of an overarching thing as far as just being able, what would be helpful, not necessarily for differentiating the scenarios, but overall and how to describe these things, is basing some of the discussion in compassionate terms as far as who is affected, property owners, who are the most vulnerable and able to be, the least resilient, people that can't just move up, and when they have flood losses, what that really looks like. So sort of putting a better face to why these investments are so important. Mary Helen, Steve, Lori, anything additional?
No, I think you did well. Thanks.
You covered it good. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, you want to hand it over to Carrie?
Well, if you're still up for it, Seth, could you give a summary of our discussion?
Sure. I was in a group with Heather and Eric and Carrie and Bill. We talked about the need for kind of your elevator speech executive summary for doing the messaging on that. And then we spent some time talking about the projects that aren't required by FEMA or the Corps of Engineers, and that it would be helpful to put together more detail, some pictures, specifications on, for like floodplain management, what's the acreage that's impacted, what kind of improvements, kind of more detail. And Bill pointed out that you guys have some CIP one-page sheets, something like that with some pictures and some detail on that, so that when people see it and see the price tag for it, there's some context. And to go along with that, just kind of any information that is being pulled together to kind of proof of concept. I think we discussed how a lot of people might see a pump motor for $6 million and wonder why that costs that much. But if you actually see a picture of how large it is and how much other people are paying, then it becomes less of an issue. And the more we can head off people's questions and skepticism early on with detail will be helpful to get the projects that are add-ons to the Corps of Engineers and FEMA. So I think that was my summary. Eric or Heather or Carrie or Bill, is there anything else I missed? With that, I'll turn it over to whoever's group's next. Oh.
Yeah, I'll note, and Eric, you're welcome to speak for yourself here, but you did also make a number of points about the benefit of thinking long-term, recognizing that capital costs often increase, that there's a lot of uncertainties and unknowns, and that kind of sticking to a bare minimum provides less room to manage that risk in the future. That was a discussion topic that we also came to, and recognizing that that's challenging, and that there are going to be a lot of folks who, you know, won't want to see another penny of cost no matter what, or how much good it does, and also that there are consequences. You know, it is an additional cost to folks to create that risk mitigation, but that was something to consider in thinking about the bigger bond packages, is not only what are the specific things that are in there, but also other pieces that are, if we needed those funds to finish PMLS or other more essential projects that could be redirected because you have more space.
Thanks for that, Carrie. Emily, you're our last group.
Corky is up for report out for us.
Yeah, Emily dumped that on me. How'd you pull that off, Emily? Nice job.
Yeah, it's not my first day.
One of the things we brought up was that perhaps we need to be a little more general about the benefit of each of the different scenarios. You know, for the higher scenario, am I getting 500-year flood protection, for example? You know, having a list of saying we're going to replace pump station number 6 doesn't really mean anything to most people. So, and Dave pointed out that we might as well go for the 250 level, because it'll be the 150 level will be just as politically challenging, probably. Jessica suggested that we tie it to the history, and if we're getting what we really need here, she suggested talking about why it's important and why it's happening right now. And let's see, we also, Dave had a nice comment of kind of saying, conveying that we're all in this together, and that any weaknesses to the system are going to impact all of us. Then we also talked a little bit about relating to the our incentivization package from the federal government. You know, the partnership that we've got between the federal government, and the fact that we have that is because we've done a good job, sort of thing. So that's all I've got.
All right. Well, I mean, just to wrap this up, so what we're going to do is we will type up all these notes. So we have all of those. We'll do our best to circle back around with answers to questions that you've raised. Certainly you can contact any of us with additional questions. You can request a individual conversation, but we also have the May 11th time set up. And so we hope that you'll take advantage of that to come and have a conversation with us about the scenarios. And then we have time on our May 18th agenda. And then we will be in front of you at every meeting, letting you know what we're hearing from the public and answering your questions. So really appreciate you taking the time with us today to take a little deeper dive in the small groups. Carrie, is there anything else that we want to share with this group before we pass it back off to Chair Fancher?
I'll just say that in those upcoming meetings later in May and in June, we'll also be sharing with you the materials that our community engagement folks and our community engagement consultants have been putting together for public engagement. So those are some of the pieces that are going to have, you know, we knew and we heard from you that y'all wanted some detail. You wanted to understand what was in things, and that kind of the high level bullets and high level messages weren't enough. And so that's why you got something really meaty and detailed. But we know that a member of the general public and probably many of your constituents might stop listening after a much shorter period of time. And so those are materials that you will be available to you, that will walk you through so that you have them. This kind of period right now is really about getting your comfort, and we'll make sure you have those more high level materials that are good for sharing with the public and with others.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And if you come in person to the meeting on the 11th, we're actually going to have a little mock setup of a tabling display so that you can see the what we're planning on taking out to the public. Mary Helen, I see your hand up.
But my mic's off. I'm having microphone difficulties. No, to speak to the public outreach, my latest example is my neighbor came over and said, "What's this postcard all about?" I didn't get the postcard, but it's about go to the website and read the annual report. And so he had a bunch of questions about the annual report. Is that something? I mean, It's a little 3x5 postcard. I've got it here somewhere in one of my piles. So maybe I missed that. Maybe I missed someone telling me that. I know that I got an email that said you can go here, and but it had a QR code on it. It had blue pictures. I don't know who sent that out, but that would have been that goes to my I didn't know anything about it, and since I didn't get one, I just wondered who all did, or if it was just, Pen 2. Anybody know? No?
Yeah, I can speak to that quickly. That's because I don't think Astor's on here. That's for the legacy districts, landowners, and it's the annual report that is focused on all things with the drainage districts. As he's noted, it is a 3x5 card, so it's possible that you didn't get one that got stuck in a machine, but yeah, that is something that we try to produce at least biannually.
Okay. No, I would just was no, yeah, they can manage to get you things to True Green and selling, all kinds of weird things, but then that seemed to be like a pretty important piece of information. But I was like, I don't know where it came from, but
Yeah,
good
so
to know.
Mary Helen, what I hear in your question, your comment is that, to give you all a heads up when, when we're going to be out in the community, when we're going to be mailing things, so you know what they are, so that you can be prepared to be able to have those conversations with your neighbors.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. So I think that's all the time we've got, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Glad we had this extra time. We'll be back. We'll see you on the 11th. We'll see you on the 18th. We'll see you at every board meeting moving forward. So more to come. Back to you, Chair Fancher.
Thank you, Jamie. We have about 5 minutes left. Wendy, do we have any members of the public that have joined that we might want to ask if they want to testify?
Do you want to introduce Brent to the board? We can do that on the 18th. So it's no problem. I don't want to put any pressure.
Hi, Brent. Sorry, we weren't going to put you on the spot today, but we will introduce you at the next meeting. That way we'll be prepared to say a little bit more about you.
Good. Sorry.
Let's see here. Any other business to come before the board? Not hearing any. Thank you for a productive discussion. And we're going to adjourn 5 minutes early, give you 5 minutes back in your day. Thank you, everybody.